This is today's business leaders. Actionable advice from real-world professionals. And now here's your host, Gabe Arnold.
All right, on today's show, I have Frank Mendoza. He is the owner and founder of Catalytics, and we are going to talk about entrepreneurship and what he's up to with his company and a bunch of other fun things today. So welcome to the show, Frank.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So we originally connected, I don't know, a year and a half or 2 years ago through My Service Copywriter Today. And like I was saying a minute ago before we started the recording here, we actually got to meet up like 6 weeks ago, excuse me, like 6 weeks ago at Pat Flynn's event. So that was a lot of fun. So I'm sure we'll get into that. But to start off, when did you first realize that you were an entrepreneur?
That's a great question. So I spent most of my career in corporate America. So I spent 12 or 13 years at Dell and a couple years at 3M. And I think that's where they would have these incubated startups, right? And I would always try and dip my head in one of those kind of incubated startup, but it was kind of one of these like, oh, it's safe though, because you still get a paycheck, right? And you're still, it's like, oh, but you get to play, right? But it's not real. I mean, let's face it, like unless you like don't have a secure paycheck coming in, it's not real. It was fun. It was actually very educational. I helped prep a lot of things. So, but that's where I knew like, oh, this is really what I want to do, right? This is, and so when I had the opportunity to start Catalytics, I jumped at the chance and kind of said, between 3M and Catalytics, I actually joined a startup. It was like, oh, now I can actually go join a startup. This is really dipping my toe in the water, but again, not real because you still got a paycheck. And so I did that for about 6 months, and then various issues happened, and CEO and I didn't click exactly where it was, and so I was let go. And God bless the wife I married. She was like, "Well, you've always wanted to start your own thing anyway, and so here's your perfect opportunity." It was like I said, quite a blessing because to have that kind of support right off the bat, it's just amazing.
Yeah.
And so luckily we had a little bit of savings, and so started Catalytics, and that really was going to kind of help me chase a little bit of my passion, which has always been around data analytics and storytelling and helping organizations get better. So been doing that for about 4 years now.
Very cool. That's awesome. And that's a pretty unique, thing you went through where you were able to experience startups and these incubators in a really safe way and learn about it. That's really, I don't think a lot of people have that opportunity. So that's, I know it's not like you were saying earlier, it's not like owning your own business or starting your own thing, but that's a really valuable lesson to go through.
Like I said, it was huge. It was definitely, I went and got my MBA. This was like a mini MBA, right? Because you definitely have to, find product market fit. You definitely have to understand your customer. You have to understand, how to position the value prop, all that kind of good stuff. Had the great opportunity. One of the incubated startups at Dell was a company called MarketVine, and Lean Startup. Probably a lot of the people in this group have heard about Lean Startup, written by Eric Ries about 10 years ago. And there was a second book called Running Lean by Ash Mara in the series. And so Ash was a local guy here in Austin, and they hired him to come in and consult. Again, big companies can hire these big consultants to do this kind of stuff in startup world. And so he came in and started really teaching about Lean Startup. And that's kind of where I fell in love with that, because it really aligned kind of with my passions and kind of where I've been previously. And so really started falling in love with that methodology, that iterate and learn and reiterate kind of mentality. So, but like I said, it's not real in regards to like, I still got a paycheck, I still got healthcare, I still got all these other things that are great. But in terms of actually learning and growing and actually understanding all those things, invaluable, right? It was like, stepping stones to get there. And I would highly encourage, if you're in an organization right now and you have those opportunities and it's something you've always thought about trying to do, there's nothing wrong with trying those venues and having those opportunities and seeing if it's really something that excites you, because you're still working like these exorbitant hours. You're still like Saturdays and Sundays. I mean, yeah, I'm getting a paycheck, but I'm still like, when I did the hourly math, I'm like, I'm like take a huge hourly pay cut here by working for these incubated startups. But
Yeah, no kidding. So when you have that as background, which is awesome, what was it like then when you did actually fully step off on your own? Do you feel like that really gave you a great head start, or what were some of the lessons or things that still surprised you? You're like, oh, I thought I did some of this. I should have known this, or what was that like?
yeah, no, it's still a scary situation. I mean, I don't think you can get away from it, right? So the fact of the matter is, it's like, oh crap, there's no paycheck coming in. Oh crap, how does this healthcare thing work? I just used to just sign up in October and it was done, right? And we just and you know, never having formed an LLC before, never having formed all the documents and accounting and you know, doing your taxes is different when you're a business versus just an individual. All those kinds of things were just like, and honestly, Gabe, I think before it was like one of the reasons why I hadn't done it, because all these unknowns, right? It was like, and they tend to be blocks or barriers to kind of getting in there. It's like, well, I don't know that very well, so why don't I just continue down this path and it's easier. But when I actually stepped off the ledge and kind of did it on my own, highly recommend reaching out to people who've done it before, right? So I reached out to a bunch of my network. It's like, okay, you've started a consulting practice. What does that mean? How do you do it? You know, all that kind of good stuff. And it did help me. Like I said, I really embraced the lean startup approach, right? And lean startup is all around de-risking, and so is entrepreneurship, period, right? But I looked at it and I said, okay, well, what's the elements of a consulting practice, right? You need leads, you need to close those leads, you need to execute, and you need references, right? Or referrals, right? And so if you look at in the simplistic thing, those are the four things you need from a consulting practice. And so I approached it as, where's my biggest risk, right? In terms of this 4 steps. And I said, you know, is executing my biggest risk? Probably not. I've executed for 15 plus years.
Yeah.
I've been a high performer. That's probably not where the challenge is. Is it in referrals? No, if I, you know, create a good relationship and execute well, referrals will come, right? But I'd never been a salesman, right? I've never actually had to close a sale, other than getting the job, maybe, you know, interviewing or something. And so I said, that's a huge risk for me, right? That's going to be a big barrier to me being able to execute and be able to get referrals. And so I started attacking that. And then I started looking at it from a lean startup approach and said, you know what, that's not the biggest risk. The biggest risk is if the leads. If I never have a lead, I can never close anything. So that's where the risk lies, right? And so if you take that approach and start looking at it from that vantage point, it's like, okay, how do I de-risk the lead situation? Because my network is only so big. And so if I go and bleed the families and friends kind of cycle, it's going to evaporate pretty quickly. And so how do I create a pipeline? How do I create a ever evolving kind of lead situation? And so that's where I went and started to de-risk the consulting practice and started to look at how do I look at it from a pipeline perspective so that I can have the opportunity to close and can have the opportunity to execute and then get the referrals going forward. So yeah, and that's where, again, I reached out to my network and said, okay, you've done this before. How have you de-risked it, that lead process? And so this was about 4 years ago, like I mentioned. So I found someone pointed me towards a platform called, at the time it was called Hourly Nerd. They've rebranded and I think they're called Catalytics now, but they basically are a marketplace. And what they do is they are a marketplace for independent consultants and a marketplace for corporations. And so corporations are always looking for independent consultants because they don't want to pay the Accentures and Bains and these exorbitant fees. And so you go create a profile, you position your skills and talents, and corporations provide their opportunities. And so if they're married up, Hourly Nerd then took a percentage of that and you have your opportunity. And that's where, you know, I actually landed my first major contract is through that route. So
nice. I think that's really brilliant that, like, one, that you broke it down into figuring out, okay, what is the risk or what are the components of this business, and kept it super simple. Like anybody can understand what you just explained. That you don't have, like, it's super simple. And then you dug in deeper to like, oh, sales is a risk, which there's some risk there, but then you found the real root risk, and then you reached out to people that had done it before instead of thinking, oh, I'm going to go figure this all out on my own.
Yeah. You know what?
Which is brilliant. And then it's problem solved, right? I mean, it's super
Yeah,
simple.
I mean, the first problem solved, right?
Right. I mean,
the next iteration of the problem, and then of course, once I found the marketplace and I found the lead opportunity, now I was like, okay, how do I close this lead? Now I got the opportunity to do step 2, which is, okay, now you got to go de-risk the next thing, and that, I think that is something that you know, I've always been. It's interesting, Gabe, because I always looked at myself as a very risk averse person, right? And I'm like, oh, I'm a very risk averse person. I'm a corporate guy. You know, I did the traditional, I went to college. I was the first in my family to go to university and get a degree. And, you know, I went into corporate jobs and just very kind of, if you look at me at risk averse, and I looked at that as always a negative. I always looked at it as like, oh, that's not going to allow me to become a good entrepreneur. So that's one of the reasons why I need to stay in corporate. And it wasn't until, honestly, a little bit further down when I actually, and again, you never know the story until afterwards, right? The story, right? Whatever's going on right now is not a story yet, right? It's not until it's over
right.
that it becomes the story that you're like, oh, this, that, and that happened.
Right? I had it all figured out. Not really.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like, no, you didn't. And now I can put the story together, right? And now looking back, and I'm like, no, that was actually my super strength, right? My superhero strength was that risk aversion, because what I did was I tried to mitigate my risks, and that actually makes me a stronger entrepreneur, right? Because I'm looking at the different steps and saying, not just I'm going to go work on the things that I'm happiest working on or having the most fun doing. No, because leads and closing deals, not my favorite thing, right?
Yeah.
But I knew, like, if I just go work on, like, no, I'm really a good executor, and look at me. If I focused only on that and that alone, I was never going to close anything, right? So it's not necessarily doing what you want to do or doing what you like doing. It's really identifying the riskiest opportunity and then de-risking it. And so I look now back and say, all those things where I looked at as a negative, being risk averse, is actually one of my superhero strengths. And now I'm able to look at different things and say, I'm still willing to take the risk, but how do I mitigate those risks or de-risk them as much as possible so that it makes sense for me? And you know, still might not make sense for some people, right? That it's not de-risked enough, but it's gotten to a point where I feel comfortable moving forward.
I really like that, because I'm pretty risk averse too, which people probably wouldn't think, you know, in a lot of things. I mean, I've been self-employed for over 20 years, and that seems risky, but I'm pretty careful about what I invest in. And over time, I've gotten smarter at what I do and what I work on. And you're exactly right. Like, you break down, like, what's the worst that could happen? And am I okay with that? And if you're not okay with it, then it's too big of a try or too big of a swing, right?
And I think it's a lot of introspection, right? For me, you know, 10 years ago, this would have been way too risky, right? For where I was and what, you know, I went and got my MBA, so I had a lot of debt there, and it was like, too risky, right? So I think it is about, like, knowing who you are, where you are in life, what type of support structure you have, a support system you have, and then, you know, but just de-risk as much until you feel comfortable, and don't compare yourself to anyone else ultimately, because what works for you may not work for other people. So
yeah, that's definitely true. Everybody's trying to copy what everybody else is doing, and it doesn't work, because it's never going to work for you. It doesn't matter what formula it is. If you don't really think it through and customize it to yourself, that, you know, then it won't work out. And it's like, I remember when I started out, like, I didn't have $500 to throw at testing something. Like, that was like a ton of money. But now, like, that's not very risky to me. Like, yeah, I mean, I'll throw $500 at something to see if it works or see if I like the idea. But, like, you do just have to know where you're at and realize that it changes over time too, based on your experience and where business is at and everything like that.
Yeah. And again, you know, what I was even willing to do 6 months ago is different than what I'm able to do, but it's a constant reevaluation. It's a and that's why I think it's so important for people who are on this journey. And maybe it goes into the FlynnCon thing, right? Is to find people who are like you,
Yeah.
right? That really, and I'll be honest with you, Gabe, it's something where I ignored for a long time, right? The community aspect is something where it's so easy as an entrepreneur just to put your head down and just try and bulldoze your way through it,
Yeah.
and forget the fact that there's other people who, to your point, like I've always been a kind of guy that, like, if I don't have to get the scar, someone else got the scar and I could learn from that, then
Yeah.
that's one, less scar I have to get. And maybe I can have a scar that I can teach somebody else, right? That they can learn from. And so, realizing, and even though I say that even today, I recognize like I could do a better job surrounding myself with the community of folks who are around me, right? That are living it and breathing it and doing it on a daily basis. Because that is an important element, which is just reminding yourself, like, don't try and just learn it on your own. If you can get away with learning it with somebody or alongside other people, you go a long way faster.
Absolutely. I had a guest on yesterday, Wade, and he was talking about, he runs a site for outdoor enthusiasts, and he talked about something that is a real part of what he does, a part of his site and part of the community he's in, but I think it applies across the board in entrepreneurship. And he said, when you're hiking up a big mountain, when you get past like the first mile or so, the herd thins out and the serious hikers are there. Then the serious mountain climbers are there. And that really stood out to me. It's something I think I'll remember for a long time, because in finding a community and finding people that are actually serious about what they're doing, you do have to find people that are actually doing what you want to be doing.
That's right.
And or are actually like every day working to get to the big goal. And that's what's great about going to an event. People that are willing to spend a few bucks and go somewhere are more serious than people that are sitting at home thinking about it, right?
Yeah, and for a lot of years, I was a wantrepreneur, right? I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I was playing the entrepreneur. I'm an intrapreneur, and I shouldn't say that, right? Because I truly believe there are people inside large organizations who are doing very innovative stuff, and they call themselves intrapreneurs, and I truly embrace that, because for a long time I was challenging the status quo inside organizations. I was trying to have them rethink the processes and things like that and trying to be innovative. So I don't want to diminish that at all. I think it's actually a very valid thing. But for a long time I would play the entrepreneur, which is I want to go start my own thing. But then the weekend would come around and Netflix, something was on, and I was like, I'm going to go watch Netflix, right? But to your point, I watched that actually with Wade, and that really resonated with me, because he also mentioned when you get to that level, not only the community is thinner, but everyone wants to help each other out, right? Yep. Everyone, like, you may not know that guy, right? I think you mentioned it, right? I didn't know this guy, but we went along because he knew how the hell he was doing, going up the road. We just went. And so it's that thing, which is if you have the right community around you and similar mindsets and similar ambitions, it's amazing to help, right? It's just like, go this way, learn this way, do this way. And everybody realizes, like, all what is it? All tides rise, all boats, or something. I don't know what they're saying, but it's you definitely get that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think if people pay attention, there's always somebody loud down at base camp yelling about how great they are and how they make it up the mountain every day. And then there's the people that are actually climbing the mountain. And that's what we have to pay attention for sure too.
Yeah. I think it's amazing. There's so many voices out there, right? And like I said, I think it's so easy to listen to so many people, especially with social media and everything that's going on today. I think it's identifying your core, right? Identifying the people that matter most to you, and just listening to them, listening to yourself, right? And listening to people who you trust. And I know when I was, thinking about even starting my own personal brand and things like that, I remember the logo you see above you, right? I remember shooting that over to you about a year ago, and like, Gabe, what do you think? What does this tell you, right? Before I tell you what it's supposed to be, what does it say? And you're like, I think it means innovation. I think, cool. That's exactly what I was trying. So it's like, figure out your core people that you trust and resonate with, and keep them close, and keep them. Be honest with yourself and them, as you move forward.
So with I'm super curious. So we've talked about it a little bit when we were together, and like I've learned bits and pieces about it. But tell me what you do in Catalytics, and like the type of people you help, and like give me any stories you can tell, or kind of case examples of what that looks like. Because I think that the other thing that entrepreneurs should pay attention to is their numbers.
Yeah.
And what the data is telling you, because all the truth is in the numbers. So tell us about how that works and what you focus on and how you help people.
Yeah. So I've always been a data guy, right? A numbers guy. I got my engineering degree, mechanical engineering in undergrad, and I've always just gravitated toward this stuff. But it really began probably in my childhood, right? And the net result of so my father quit school, or he dropped out of school in 7th grade. He never finished even middle school, for that matter. And he then got his GED though in the Army, and he knew he needed the education, and so he went back and he was trying to get his associate's degree, and that was right about the same time he was taking a course in algebra in order to get his associates, and that was right about the same time, like 6th grade or whatever I was, and I was taking algebra, right? And so my parents are divorced, so I'd go over on weekends and stuff, and he would say, "Hey, since you're here, would you mind tutoring me on algebra?" Right. And so I would we'd sit around the dinner table and, pencil, paper, each going through algebra and learning it together. And taught me 2 things. One, it taught me when you have a goal, don't let your ego be so bold that you can't ask for help, even from your 12 or 13-year-old son. That's right. Awesome. Which I think was an amazing lesson to learn that early. Yeah. The second thing it taught me is you can help a lot of people by explaining things and leveraging the power of math, basically. Mm-hmm. And so I really fell in love with not just math, but like explaining and breaking it down to its simplest of elements and explaining how this could help you achieve your goal. In his case, creating an associate's degree, but in other people's goals, it's improving productivity, or improving profitability, whatever that may be. To your point, data. Well, I shouldn't say data doesn't lie. It can. Right. Data can lie, but if taken objectively and you collect the right data and asking the right question, you have the opportunity there to make some really good data-driven decisions as opposed to gut feels and things like that. Mm-hmm. That being said, I completely understand that given all the data in the world, people still are humans, and people are still going to make decisions based on emotion, right? So what I did when I started Catalytics was my attempt to help organizations take this new nebulous concept of AI or big data or whatever you want to talk about, and break it down and really understand kind of the elements of it, and then help them make better data-driven decisions, or at least give them the information so they can make better data-driven decisions. And so when I started Catalytics, I mentioned Catalytics and people are like, "Do you analyze cats?" And I'm like, "No, I don't analyze cats." But what we do is we go into organizations and help them figure out how to leverage these emerging technologies, these things like artificial intelligence, things like machine learning. And so, but it really boils down to really understanding what problem they're trying to solve. So a lot of people just want to check the box and say, "I'm doing AI, I'm doing AI." And in those cases, I'm very honest with people and just say, let's not just check a box. Like, let's figure out how we actually turn over and gain an ROI on this and make sure we're solving the right problem. And so had the great opportunities of working some really name brands and things like that. And really just loving it. And that's now transitioned into 2 things. One is a personal brand, fxmendoza.com, which if you'll notice, the F and the X are kind of math oriented. But those are my initials, Francisco Xavier Mendoza, FX. And so trying to help use FX Mendoza as an opportunity to show people, for example, how data can help improve society, data can help improve businesses, and data can even help improve individuals themselves, right? And so trying to leverage that as a platform in order to do that. And then the second thing is I'm now launching another venture called Detecting Talent. And Detecting Talent is a startup. I just got accepted into an accelerator program. And so the attempt there is to help organizations identify those employees, those top talent employees within their organization that are likely to resign. And so as a result, be a negative impact in terms of competitive advantage for those organizations. So helping them kind of be proactive right now, if you look at employee retention situations, organizations really have two things at their disposal when someone submits their resignation. One is their exit interview. And the second is the 2 weeks before they actually resign, right? And a lot of people run into that situation. I come in on a Monday, submit my resignation. Now that spins up a whole whirlwind of HR trying to figure out like, well, how about if we give you more money, or how about we give you more vacation, or change your stock options, or whatever. And so that doesn't give, and usually by that time the person's resigned, right? They're like, I've been gone for a month. You know what I mean? Like I've submitted, I've been checked out for a month here. Yep. And so detecting talent is using AI, machine learning, to try and get in front of it and help organizations identify it. And again, it's not a big brother's watching. It really is, identifying those people who are in the corner maybe that are not, I've been a part of a lot of organizations where the squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? But the person who's executing and doing a great job, they're just quiet and they're doing their job, are often ignored, right? And so there's only so much that person can take, and then they're like, I'm jumping on LinkedIn, updating my profile, and I'm getting out of here. And so how do you identify those people and become proactive around it, and then position the right things for those individuals, not just here's more money, right? That's not the situation, a conversation you want to have, but truly try and understand kind of the breakdown of why that person might be looking at it. And so that's where you can look at pattern recognition and things like that from an AI perspective to try and identify that, and again, become proactive in trying to keep those people in the organization and engaged.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that's such a huge asset protection for any team that can figure out, oh, we're not really serving this team member right. What do we need to change and adjust there? So I'm curious, like what data will feed into that, or what are you envisioning with it? I know it's not fully rolled out or developed. It sounds like.
Yeah.
So how will that work, like from a data perspective?
Yeah. So we certainly need data from an organization, right? So people who have left before, so that we can start to build algorithms to try and identify what the patterns were and things like that. But, it's not things like we're scanning your eye pattern or checking your LinkedIn, how often you're checking, none of that, right? It's more like, your education level, what job role you're in, how long you've been with the company, how long you've been with the manager, the existing manager, what was your last performance review? When's the last time you're promoted? Some just high level kind of information. And we add some other proprietary kind of external and different data sets to that. But trying to, again, not really like I said, we're not tracking your keystrokes or things like that. It's really high level kind of data in the most parts, but you can still identify those people. And again, the key, again, going back to kind of demystifying AI a little bit, right? AI is not magic. Right? AI is not this nebulous concept where you just like it's going to do everything, right? Like if I just implement AI, it'll give me everything. No, it's only as good as the information you put in, right? Garbage in, garbage out. And so, if you want to enter gender, for example, we can enter gender. If you want to exclude gender, we'll exclude gender. If you want to enter gender, but check for bias on an ongoing basis, we can do that as well. So, and then explain, like, if we do identify bias, like, okay, we've identified bias here. What kind of steps do you want to take to mitigate that bias? Again, mitigating risk, or, we just eliminate it. And maybe that's a hit on your accuracy associated with the prediction. But, but everything around AI is probabilistic, right? So it's all about probabilities. It's all about, it's not saying Gabe is going to leave and Gabe's going to leave, tomorrow. It's like, there's a high likelihood that Gabe is going to leave because other people like Gabe who have historically followed Gabe, the trend or the education, or et cetera, have left, right? When they haven't been promoted in 3 years, those type of things. So, again, it's not going to say, well, I know Gabe now, and I know, he's going to have a burger on Tuesday. Like, no, it's not, AI is not magic, right? It's not going to tell you everything about Gabe, but it's going to give you some insight that historically or previously you didn't have available to yourself.
Got it. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you're just really looking for like almost personality level, you know, a lot of things, but it's like that level of like, oh,
Yeah.
they've
I
been
mean,
here this long. There's age, there's education, there's all these things that over time you can develop and see patterns from, it sounds like.
exactly. So I describe more as I'm looking at demographic level, right? Not necessarily psychographic yet. There's some elements where I could get into psychographics and personality attributes and things like that. And there's potential there. Not today, but like you said, it's not fully vetted yet. It's not fully out in the world. Right now, we're looking at onboarding a couple beta customers. And so, and like I said, we're going through the accelerator program as well right now. And so, yeah, we'll be testing some stuff out and hopefully getting in front of some investors and things like that as well.
Very cool. That sounds like an amazing project.
But certainly, if anyone's open and wants to participate, certainly reach out to me. I'll make my shameless pitch there. If anybody's interested in participating in a beta.
Yep, that'd be perfect. So just kind of as we close up here, as you look over the last 4 years that you've been on your own now, I mean, I think one huge lesson you shared that I appreciate is obviously like mitigate your risk, break things down into chunks, figure out where the risk is. Are there any other big lessons that you think people should, starting out should know or have in hand before they jump?
Yeah, I think for me it was I guess a little bit around ego, right? Don't ego and one other thing, right? So you might be really good at something, right? So I was at Dell and at 3M, I was a consultant, and I would go from consulting, and I was really good at consulting, right? And I was always a high performer, and people would tap on the shoulder and come over where I'm working, all this kind of stuff. Being a good consultant does not mean you know how to run a good consulting firm, right? Those are two vastly different things, right? And like I said, if I was just focused on that, I would have only focused on the executing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Running a good firm means you have to focus on the leads. You have to focus on marketing and sales and accounting and finance. And there's so much more that goes into running a business doing what you love, versus just doing what you love, right? And that's where, again, a lot of people confuse that, right? And they think, well, if I'm a good X, right, I'm gonna be a great owner of X.
Yeah.
Right. And that does not necessarily mean that, right?
It doesn't work that way, unfortunately.
Yeah, it does. If it did, I mean, then everyone would follow their passion. And
right.
And unfortunately, you have to do the things you don't want to do and love to do all the time because you have to do these other elements, right? And so, and that goes to the ego piece, which is don't be so overconfident that you think, well, because I'm good consultant, I'm going to have a good consulting practice, right? You're going to need mentors and friends and like I said, community and all of this other help to help you with those other things that you maybe haven't done before or hadn't done or not very good at, right? And so let that ego go, ask for help, ask for that support, and hopefully you get to do a lot of the things you love to do. Because you got support doing the things you don't necessarily like, but never gets away from you're still having to do some of those other elements as well.
Yeah, I think that's excellent advice. It's easy for people to forget. Oh, there's a bunch of other skills that come with running a business. It's not just that one thing that you're offering as the service or product or whatever you're doing. So that's very good advice.
Yeah, and like I said, but look at your support structure. Look at those mentors and a community. And like I said, even to this day, I have to remind myself, like, wait a minute, I got a community out there that I could tap into. Why am I not tapping into it, right? And because honestly, if it's me, I'm like, I'd love to. I know this is letting my nerd flag fly, but I'd rather be analyzing a data set till 2 a.m, right? Rather than doing some of this other stuff. But that's just me. But there's these other elements that need to be done, right? Branding and marketing and all these other things to allow me to do those other things that I love. So
awesome. Terrific. Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all this, Frank. I really enjoy
Absolutely.
it. We'll definitely have you back in another 6 months or year and see how business is going and how the new startup is going. But thanks for sharing your wisdom. I think there's tons of applicable things here for everybody, and it's been enjoyable to hang out and spend some time together again. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's great to see you, and we're gonna have to reconnect. I know I'm planning on going to FlynnCon again next year. So
Excellent. And everybody can check out catalyticsconsulting.com, which I'll throw in the comments here and in the show notes. And that's where you can connect with Frank and see what he's up to. And I highly encourage you guys to check it out. And if you are somebody that's looking to learn about AI and even like the talent end of things like you talked about, reach out and so you can see if it's a good fit.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Today's Business Leaders with Gabe Arnold. Remember to subscribe on iTunes. For more information, visit todaysbusinessleaders.com.